I'm Craig Nash, Senior Editor at Good Faith Media.
And I'm Hayoung Park, a social work and theology student.
We are co-hosts of the Good Faith Bible Studies podcast, where we explore and discuss the weekly biblical text and lessons found in Good Faith magazine.
We'll also share ideas for leading group discussions on each week's text and lesson.
Let's dive in.
This week's passage comes from Psalm chapter 66, verses 8 through 20. Bless our God, O peoples. Let the sound of his praise be heard. Who has kept us among the living and has not let our feet slip? For you, O God, have tested us. You have tried us as silver is tried. You have brought us into the net. You laid burdens on our backs. You let people ride over our heads. We went through the fire and through water. And yet you have brought us to the spacious place. I will come into your house with burnt offerings. I will pay you with my vows, those that my lips uttered and my mouth promised when I was in trouble. I will offer to you burnt offerings of fatted calves with the smoke of the sacrifice of rams. I will make an offering of bulls and goats. Come and hear, all you who fear God, and I will tell of what he has done for me. I cried aloud to him. He was extolled with my tongue. If I had cherished iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But truly God has listened. He has heard the words of my prayer. Blessed be God who has not rejected my prayer or removed his steadfast love from me. So what did you think?
Yeah, so before we started recording, you and I talked about the whole passage, Psalm 66. Today's study is only that last half of it. And my first impression of the whole Psalm, this is good. You don't have to just read the last half. You can read the whole Psalm if you want.
You have free will.
Yeah. Is the passage we have taken in context of the whole Psalm is that it feels initially like one of those liturgical Psalms. And by liturgical, I mean that in the sense that it is intended for a group of people to recite the story of God as God has led God's people. And I'm just reminded that as followers of God, this is what we're called to do, to keep reciting the story. I think, as I said before, liturgy is the work of the people. And much of that work is, this sounds weird to say this, but dramatizing the story of God. And, depending on what type of church you're in, if you're in what we call a more high church setting, that's kind of always at the front of your mind, that Sunday morning worship is often painted in terms of we're re-dramatizing liturgy. But even in what we call low church churches, the entering processional, how you interact with each other when you first start, and how you go about the transitions in worship and how you walk out, is all part of retelling the story of God and God's people.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of work doing trainings at churches on how they become more trauma informed. And we often talk about the difference between making like real meaning out of trauma and like really crazy things that have happened in our lives, and saying like God was with us, like, and we're so grateful for that. And that being a form of kind of processing hard experiences, and in the long run, that helping us achieve resilience as a community. And then there's this other way of explaining away the traumatic things that have happened, called spiritual bypassing, where we're like, God meant that for good. So like, you just need to be grateful that like you survived, and like at least like these things didn't happen. So like these ways of saying like your experience is invalid, and like you just need to kind of like repress your emotions. So very different, but also in some ways doing very parallel things. And so like these kind of liturgical passages are often, to me, waffling between these two kind of postures in my own kind of interpretation. So in like, for example, in verse 18, it says, if I had cherished iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened, which to me sounds like conditional love. I'm oh, so God doesn't listen to us when we're like.
That's interesting. It's not just that God wouldn't have responded, it's God wouldn't have even listened.
Yeah, which feels intense. And also there's other parts in the Bible where that's not true. Like there are people who did cherish sin in their heart, and God was still present.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you said that, I was thinking of just this. This is could open up a can of worms that we've never really got into. The text that we've studied we haven't been in a lot of Paul's epistles, but this idea of original sin and kind of this evangelical understanding of, and not just evangelical, that it's kind of rooted in Jewish scripture. That idea that sin is between us and God,
right?
And God can't look on us
if
there's sin between us and God,
right?
And this is this could be one of those proof texts for that passage.
Right, right.
I think many of us would reject that, but it's important to know that that's
Yeah, and yeah, I think it's just something that I'm wrestling with and continuing to unpack.
I am interested in this. So for some reason, my Bible app defaulted to NIV, which I don't typically use.
Mm.
There was this massive difference
Oh,
in translation in verse 11. What was verse 11?
you brought us into the net, you laid burdens on our backs.
Okay, you brought us into the net.
Yeah, what do you have?
Uh, it's not as different as I thought.
Okay.
She brought us into prison,
Oh, that is
but
different
it
than like a
is,
noun.
it is, and you brought us into nets could have multiple meanings.
Yeah,
It could mean you have, like, you're using this imprisonment as protection.
that's true. Yeah.
Um,
Whereas if you just say prison, it's like that has like a criminal
exactly.
association with it.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, maybe we should do that more often
Yeah.
whenever we
Yeah.
see, because
Yeah, definitely.
it's important to consider how different people translate
That's true.
these things.
Yeah, I've had Bible studies where we've read the passage for the week like 3 times in different
Oh, that's great.
versions, and that's always been really interesting. So,
Yeah. Well, in just a moment, we will talk about the Good Faith Bible Study lesson for this week. This week's lesson was brought to us by the Reverend Dr. Kate Hanch. The Reverend Dr. Kate Hanch is the director of the Baptist House of Studies at SMU's Perkins School of Theology in Dallas, Texas. She's an excellent writer, excellent scholar, excellent minister.
So yeah, jumping off of what we just talked about that cherishing iniquity, the study does unpack that and interpret that. It's really interesting. So it says, I understand the psalmist not cherishing iniquity as an act of awareness and reflection. For me, I know that when I self-reflect, I am less able to hear God's voice. And then goes on to talk about how often like that sin that we are cherishing could be systemic. So whether that be overconsumption or like lack of creation care, white supremacy, etc. Which I was like, oh, like I'd never really thought about it that way. And I think I'm still inclined to be like, I think it's both and like,
Yeah.
and I don't know that the author would disagree with that. But I do think that reframe of like cherishing inequity as a lack of self-reflection is helpful because those systemic sins like racism, patriarchy, homophobia, etc., those have a way of just like getting into our daily habits and thoughts without us even knowing.
You know, that we have to have a perfect intention in order to come before God. And to this point, to the systemic sin point, does any of us ever, are we even capable of that? She kind of touches on this. She brings up this Julian of Norwich quote where she says, "For I'm sure that no one asks for mercy and grace with the right intention unless mercy and grace be first given to them." And that can get into like some reformed
Calvinist
type theology, but it does speak to this idea that God is bigger than our sin, whether personal sin, or systemic sin.
Right. Yeah, and I think kind of touching back on this idea of like we don't know what we need until we see it, but then we don't see it until we, it's like the circular thing. It reminds me of when people's biases against certain people groups prevents them from like seeing or like believing certain people can be ordained. Like if you don't see women as being able to be pastors or ordained in some way, you're literally not going to listen to them if they preach.
Right.
Or like if you don't think LGBTQ people ought to be ordained to like pastors, like you're also not going to listen to them in the same way. And so like I think in that way it makes me connect to like, well, if we don't listen to the world around us, we most certainly can't hear God working through those people.
Yeah, certainly. And then Kate also just approached this lesson the way that we talked about this before. It's hard to tell. I've read all of these months ago, and then I read the passage again, and it's hard to tell is my first impression of the passage informed by me reading the story a long time ago.
Yeah.
But she does confirm this idea that this passage is a corporate kind of example of worship. It's telling the story, responding to the story, and it has certain like elements. And then she even says that there's a benediction. And still God is with us. Because God is with us, we can testify that God's love can and will be with others. That is the psalmist's benediction for us, which is an excellent benediction. And in just a moment, we will talk about how you can discuss this passage in your small group.
Before we discuss some ideas for leading a group through this week's text and lesson, we want you to know that we have created a leader's guide to help you prepare.
The leader's guide contains an overview of the lesson, some highlights to focus on, and several discussion questions for your group to go through.
For those questions, you can focus on one or all of them or any combination. Also, feel free to adapt them for your particular group's needs.
The leader's guide can be found at goodfaithmedia.org.
The first thing that I thought about when doing Sunday school or Bible study groups is the idea that the gathering of people doing Sunday school or Bible studies, etc., that is actually embodying what the psalm is doing. So the study itself talks about how communal prayers prompt individual reflection, and how this communal shared worship experience is the thing that sustains and carries and commissions individual people into the work of God. And I think it's number one, it's a helpful encouragement to anyone that's leading a Bible study. This is good work. This is faithful central work to God's kingdom. And then two, I think it's a helpful way to frame that particular meaning. It's hey guys, we're embodying this passage. We're continuing the tradition of the psalmist.
Yeah. A lot of times we're mindful of this in a corporate worship experience, but we may not be mindful of it in a small group, that it all matters. And by it all matters, I mean, not to get used churchy language, the way you greet your brother and sister in God matters. The way you have conversations matter, and the way that you walk out matters. And the psalm kind of treats all of those actions of entering and retelling and re-dramatizing and then exiting. It treats all of those as holy matters. So that's one thing to be mindful of. And the thing I thought of, I'm always thinking, when I'm looking at these passages, I'm looking at the lectionary and where we are in the lectionary, and we are 5 weeks after Easter. It may be an interesting just kind of practice in line with this idea of retelling the story of God's provision. What if you practice retelling the story of Easter here 5 weeks after? And maybe not going back to it in the Bible, but asking people just to say, what is the Easter story?
Right. Yeah. And maybe even you could talk about not only just the biblical story, but your experience this year of that story. So you can be not only was oh, Jesus did these things, which is great, but also this year when I was at the Maundy Thursday service, I was really struck by this thing, or in light of things that have happened in my life, Sunday morning was really powerful. And that also being part of that remembrance process.
Our time was so stressful for me because we were doing all the Eastery things and I didn't get to sit in it, and now I'm happy to or
even more kind of vulnerably, maybe this is the first Easter you're spending without a loved one, or after a big transition, and so just acknowledging that.
Well, we look forward to being with you next week for another episode of Good Faith Bible Studies.
I'm Hayoung Park.
And I'm Craig Nash.
And you've been listening to the Good Faith Bible Studies podcast from Good Faith Media.
Our music comes from Pond 5.
Each weekly lesson can be found in Good Faith magazine.
You can also sign up to receive a free digital leader's guide.
Learn about how to receive both these resources at goodfaithmedia.org.
There you can find daily news and opinion, various podcasts from our Good Faith Media team and partners, and information about the initiatives that help guide our work.
So visit us at goodfaithmedia.org, and we'll be back next week with another installment of the Good Faith Bible Studies podcast.